Bellevue is one of the most renowned hospitals in New York City. It has over 800 beds and 1,200 doctors, and it is one of only 10 hospitals in the country designated a special pathogens hospital. Now, that means they are pros when it comes to handling infectious diseases. And the chief medical officer there tells me, due to some planning and persistence, they are still just a step ahead of the tidal wave.
There are signs everywhere that New York City is the U.S. epicenter of this pandemic. The city's medical examiner setting up a massive makeshift morgue next to the city's most famous public hospital, Bellevue.
We have to stay ahead of the wave. We have to keep sprinting so that it doesn't catch up with us. Because if it catches up with us, we'll drown.
This is the first video from inside Bellevue, shot for us by the hospital. The scene here, a stark contrast to much of what we've seen from other hospitals in New York. If they are drowning, Bellevue is still afloat.
Is there sufficient PPE?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Nate Link is Bellevue's chief medical officer.
So this entire floor has become basically a COVID-19 intensive care unit.
Everyone who needs an N95 mask at your hospital at this moment has one.
Absolutely. Without question.
You do hear some people who sound panicked. I'm talking about doctors. I'm talking about seasoned nurses who say that they are just being hit by a tidal wave. That doesn't seem to be the experience that you're relating.
3 weeks ago, we were in a normal hospital. Then the first patient hit the hospital, and it feels like ever since then, we have been sprinting to stay ahead of the wave.
Dr. Link takes us inside the Bellevue ICU.
Every single cubicle has a COVID patient.
He's not wearing a mask in the ICU hallway because over the last 2 weeks, it has been transformed.
Our engineers and carpenters go into each space to turn it into a negative pressure room, which is the safest possible for patient care. As each room got opened up, literally a COVID-19 patient filled that space behind them. It was almost a race to the finish line until just a couple of days ago, they finished the 54th room and we filled it with a patient.
So what happens when the next 54 and the next 54 and the next 54 show up at the hospital?
I think I've got the next 3 steps in mind. Our next space is where they do colonoscopies. Then we're moving down to the operating rooms. That will give us 60 more.
If that's still not enough and more beds are needed, Dr. Link says they'll double up on patients in the ICU.
And that will take us up to 200. So I think eventually we might have cots in the cafeteria or a big circus tent outside.
The question, why has Bellevue seemingly been able to do what so many other hospitals apparently have not? Some of it, Dr. Link says, is in Bellevue's DNA.
We have always taken care of the patients that nobody else wanted, really. From yellow fever and smallpox, typhus and tuberculosis, and then AIDS in the 80s to take care of infectious diseases and pandemics. It's really what Bellevue's been about.
His advice to the nation?
You know, the cow's out of the barn. The virus is here. It's everywhere. However serious you think it is, it's probably worse than you think because there are a lot of invisible cases you don't know about. New York, 2 weeks ago, had only 300 cases. New York today has 30,000. The cities around America with 300 cases should realize the only difference between them and New York is 2 weeks. It's the most crucial time for them to implement the shutting down of the social interactions and the mingling, the sheltering in place, all of that. The wave of patients that they're imagining will hit them in 2 weeks, those patients have not yet been infected. And if you could prevent that infection, you will prevent the wave.
How long can you keep it up?
I think we're going to keep this up as long as we have to.
This morning, New York City has over 50,000 diagnosed cases. Hoda?
Wow, that's a fascinating story, Cynthia. And you wonder what Dr. Link, if he has some advice for these other hospitals, because all we see are images of all these struggles. What can they learn from him?
Yeah, he says one of the things they realized early on is that they could not allow a bottleneck in the emergency department, that they had to be able to have places to put patients so that they could, in fact, get treated as rapidly as possible. He says they're now opening up parts of the hospital they haven't used for 35 years. It is a massive structure. And the other, of course, critical thing is their staff. And he says they're going to provide tests to any member of the staff who needs one at that tent right outside the hospital. So they are doing their best. They're staying just ahead of it. And I do think there's some hope here in this story for the rest of the nation's hospitals.
Oh, certainly. All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia.